Icewind Dale isn't a game praised for its story, often overshadowed by the Baldur's Gate, but one part of its narrative truly captivated me. The story of the severed hand. I was enchanted by the atmosphere of this fortress when I first played it as a kid, and revisiting the game recently, I fell in love with the tale behind the hand all over again. It left such an impact on me that I decided to make an episode about it. So, join me as I take you through the full story of the severed hand, a journey of betrayal, sacrifice, and the echoes of an ancient legacy. Beginnings. Long ago, during an age of expansion and renewal, the elven people decided it was time to establish a sanctuary in the frigid north. They sought a place where their kind could thrive, protected from the chaos of the world beyond, and they knew such a task would require a leader of exceptional resolve. Among the many wise and gifted wizards of the time, one stood out above all others: Larrell. Known for his wisdom and unwavering will, he accepted the responsibility placed upon him. His journey was long and perilous. Riding across the frozen plains and climbing the jagged peaks of the spine of the world, Larrell faced countless dangers: wild beasts, fierce storms, and even the dark hordes that prowled the north. Yet he pressed on, determined to fulfill his purpose. Winter after winter passed, but Larrell endured, and eventually, deep within the heart of the tundra, he discovered what he had been searching for: a place where the elven people could build something lasting. There, he founded a great stronghold, and the elves made it their home. The citadel grew into a beacon of elven power and culture. Under Larrell's guidance, the harsh and frozen landscape was transformed into fertile ground. The elves thrived, creating powerful magical artifacts and living in harmony with the land they had claimed. They named their sanctuary the Hand of the Seldrain, honoring the pantheon of elven gods. From a distance, the fortress appeared as 5 towering spires, arranged like the fingers of a hand reaching toward the sky. To outsiders, it was simply called the Severed Hand, a strange and imposing silhouette against the cold northern horizon. More than a city, it became a fortress. The presence of the elves held back the Orcish hordes that had long threatened the southern lands. Whenever the orcs gathered in force, they were met with devastating resistance: swift hippogriff riders from the skies, and masterful archers, swordsmen, and mages on the ground. The Hand of the Seldarine stood as a proud symbol of elven resilience, a gleaming citadel carved from the coldest stone, where beauty, power, and tradition lived side by side. For many centuries, it endured, and for many centuries it defended the realms beyond. Alliance. For many years, the elves stood firm against the relentless tide of orc and goblin warbands that roamed the north. These creatures attacked with brutal frequency and savage determination, threatening to overwhelm even the great elven fortress. To ensure their survival, the elves turned to an unlikely but powerful ally: the dwarves of Dorne's Deep. Faced with a shared enemy, the two ancient races forged a close alliance, bound not only by necessity but by mutual respect. What followed was an age of prosperity and collaboration. United in purpose, elves and dwarves combined their greatest strengths: the precise craftsmanship of the dwarves and the timeless magic of the elves. Together they created weapons and artifacts of immense power and exquisite beauty, works unmatched even in the long histories of both peoples. Armed with the fruits of this alliance, they held the northern hordes at bay. The Severed Hand stood unchallenged. For generations, the elves lived in peace within their citadel, safe under the shared guardianship of stone and spell. The bond between elf and dwarf deepened over time. There was harmony, trust, a rare and precious unity between two peoples so often divided in the wider world. But such unity would not last. Eventually came the betrayal. For a time, the alliance held strong, but peace, even among ancient allies, is a fragile thing. A dispute arose between the elves and dwarves over the powerful magical items they had forged together. The dwarves, ever practical and keen on craftsmanship serving a purpose, proposed selling these creations to settlements across the north. They saw opportunity, trade, profit, influence. The elves, however, were outraged. To them, such artifacts were sacred, meant only for trusted hands. Giving them to humans, or worse, letting them fall into careless fingers. Unthinkable. They accused the dwarves of greed. The debate stretched for months. Tensions grew. Eventually, the dwarves relented. The elves believed the matter settled. One day, during a routine patrol beyond the citadel's reach, an elven scouting party engaged a group of orcs and goblins. A battle like so many before, but something was different. This time the creatures fought with uncanny strength and coordination. And worse, they wielded weapons imbued with powerful enchantments. Artifacts, ones that could only have come from the Alliance. The elves were furious. No elf would have handed such treasures to the enemy. To them the culprit was clear. The dwarves denied everything, swore upon their honor that they had sold nothing to the orcs or goblins. Hoping to preserve what remained of the Alliance, the elves chose to believe them, or at least to keep talking. But diplomacy had lost its footing. Every conversation became an accusation, every word sharpened by suspicion. What once was friendship soon turned to bitterness, and then open conflict. On that grim day, centuries of trust crumbled. The Alliance was broken. Now isolated, the elves of the Hand of the Seldarine stood alone, caught between the rage of their former allies and the ever-advancing goblinoid hordes. The war that followed was long and brutal. Orcs and goblins surged from the wild north, pushing deeper into elven territory. The elven warriors held fast, but their numbers dwindled with every battle. In time, the fighting reached a desolate valley near the citadel. There, the two forces clashed in a battle so fierce and so bloody that the land would forever be known as the Fields of Slaughter. It's said the earth drank so much blood that the ground remained stained red for months. Later, those same fields would become a road for traders and travelers, but the name and the memory would remain. Despite their valor, the elves were losing. Cut off from the southern kingdoms, with no reinforcements and nowhere to retreat, their doom drew ever closer. And within the tower, Larrel, the wise, the builder of the Hand, watched his people fade, war by war, year by year, and slowly, desperation took hold. Last hope, Yvain, and the fall of Dawn's Deep. As the Orcish forces closed in on the Hand of the Seldarine, situation grew increasingly desperate. With no aid coming from the elven realms to the south and the alliance with the dwarves shattered, hope was fading. Yet, in the midst of despair, one voice rose above the silence. Yvain, daughter of Larrel. Unlike her father and many others among her people, Yvain refused to believe the dwarves were responsible for the betrayal. She had seen the signs, the wounds left on both sides, and she understood that continuing the conflict between elves and dwarves would only lead to mutual destruction. Her father, once wise and measured, had become consumed by grief and anger, blind to any alternative path. When her appeals to him fell on deaf ears, Yvain made the difficult decision to act alone. Defying her father's orders, she left the safety of the citadel and made the perilous journey through the war-torn lands to Dorne's Deep, hoping to speak with the dwarves directly and find a way to restore what had been lost. Her arrival was not welcomed. The memory of the broken alliance was fresh, and the dwarves were wary, but Yvain's determination and sincerity slowly earned their trust. Day after day, she sat in council with them, tirelessly working to mend the old wounds and convince them that unity was the only path to survival. And after long debates and sleepless nights, the dwarves agreed. For the greater good, a new pact would be forged. With renewed hope, Yvain prepared to return home, determined to convince her people and her father that reconciliation was possible. But fate had other plans. Just as she was preparing for the journey back, a dwarven scout brought grim news. The largest Orcish army seen in generations was marching toward Dorne's Deep. There was no time to rally forces. The defenses were quickly overrun, and the dwarves and their few elven allies were forced to retreat into the depths of their ancient stronghold. Despite the dire conditions, Yvain remained resolute. The dwarves collapsed key passages behind them, forcing the orcs into narrow, controlled fights deep underground. Every skirmish was costly for the enemy, but it was clear the defenders were being pushed further back with each passing day. Eventually, preparations were made for a final retreat into the icy tunnels of Worm's Tooth Glacier. Even amidst such darkness, Yvain held on to hope that she might one day return to the Hand, bearing tales of bravery and sacrifice. Hope that her father would listen, would see that the dwarves had stood beside her, not as enemies, but as allies. Hope that the bond between their peoples could yet be restored, and that the citadel in the north might rise again. Though Yvain had succeeded in rekindling a fragile alliance and brought new hope to both races, the tides of war proved too powerful to overcome. Despite the dwarves' strategic brilliance and unwavering courage, the Orcish horde that descended upon Dorne's Deep was vast beyond reckoning. One by one, the defenders fell, their resistance carving dearly bought time, but not salvation. Yvain fought alongside the dwarves until the very end, never wavering. In her final moments, she stood as a symbol of the unity that once was and might have been again. When the last bastion of Dorne's Deep fell, her body was recovered by the surviving dwarves, who honored her in a way no elf had ever been before. Her remains were laid to rest within the Hall of Heroes, among the greatest champions of dwarvenkind. A statue was raised in her likeness, carved with care and reverence. Upon its base, an inscription was etched in stone. In memory of Yvain, whose understanding and selflessness will be remembered forever. But her sacrifice was not enough to stop the darkness. Dorne's Deep fell to the orcs and goblins, its halls silenced, its forges extinguished. Yvain's dream of reconciliation perished within its depths, and back at the hand of the Seldarine, her absence gave rise to a cruel misunderstanding. Larrel, devastated and blind with grief, assumed the worst. When word of her death reached him, without context, without truth, he believed the dwarves had slain his daughter. The fury in his heart, once tempered by wisdom, hardened into unrelenting wrath. Whatever hope remained for peace was shattered in that moment. The Mythal. As the war dragged on, the elven forces began to falter. One by one, their outer defenses fell and the battles crept ever closer to the Hand itself. Desperate to protect his people and buy them time, Archmage Larrel devised a bold plan. He would cast a Mythal, an ancient and nearly forgotten elven spell, over the Hand and the surrounding lands. If completed, the Mythal would grant powerful magical protections, giving the elves time to summon reinforcements from their kin in the south. However, a Mythal is more than just a spell. It is a living enchantment that binds itself to a place, drawing power from the natural world and shaping reality within its bounds. A properly cast Mythal could empower defenders, suppress enemies, and shield the land from harm, but it required immense power, time, and precision. Luxuries the elves no longer had. Sensing the elves' vulnerability, the orc and goblin hordes gathered for a final assault. The largest force the elves had ever faced descended upon the Hand, and the Mythal was not yet ready. Knowing this could be their last stand, the defenders resolved to hold the line, no matter the cost, and buy Larrel and the other mages the time they needed. For days, the elven warriors fought bravely, cutting down wave after wave of invaders. Yet despite their valor, the tide was against them. Slowly, the elves were pushed back, retreating deeper into the towers of the Hand. When it became clear that the fortress would fall, a desperate plan was formed. The most sacred of the towers was the Tower of Cyanine. Within it were housed magical weapons and ancient elven artifacts, relics of great power. Should these fall into enemy hands, it could spell doom not only for the Hand, but for all the surrounding lands. The elves knew they could not let that happen, and so a terrible decision was made. The artifacts were rigged to release their stored energy in one great surge, enough to destroy the tower in a single cataclysmic blast. But for the plan to work, the orcs and goblins needed to be lured inside. Someone would have to stay behind. Someone would need to draw the horde into the tower and hold them there long enough for the explosion to consume them all. That task fell to Lithias, a bladesinger, and one of the finest warriors of the elven people. Trained from youth in the arts of blade, spell, and diplomacy, bladesingers were the pride of elven society. Lithias had fought many battles in the name of the Seldarine, but when the darkest hour came, he swore to protect Larrel and the Hand with his very life. With the horde at his heels, Lithias ascended the tower. As he reached its pinnacle, the enemy flooded in behind him. He stood his ground, sword gleaming, and fought with blade and faith for the last time. With his back to the wall, surrounded on all sides, he heard the first deep rumblings from the tower's foundation, and he smiled. The catastrophe. As the Dark Horde swept through the lower levels of the Hand, cutting down the last defenders and scaling the towers, the Mythal was finally completed. A radiant light enveloped the fortress, but something went terribly wrong. Larrel and his fellow mages had succeeded in casting the Mythal, but not as intended. Rather than protect, the spell turned on everything it touched. Every living creature within the Hand and the surrounding lands, orc, goblin, elf, was drained of life, their essence pulled away until only death remained. Those who survived the initial surge found themselves frozen in a twisted moment of undeath, locked forever in the final throes of battle. the fallen began to rise. Elven warriors, orcish berserkers, all became phantoms of what they once were, haunting the ruins in endless cycles of war and sorrow. And the land itself, once vibrant and full of life, became hollow and cold. Only Larrel remained untouched by death, but even he was not spared punishment. Labilas Enorith, the elven god of time and longevity, intervened, not to save, but to judge. Furious at Larrel's recklessness and pride and grieving for the countless lives lost and twisted by the failed spell, Labelas cursed the Archmage. He was transformed into a Balnorn, an undying guardian, forced to remain in the ruins of the Hand, alone, eternal, and surrounded by the restless dead he had doomed. Madness soon followed. Now, the once great Larrel wanders the empty halls, tormented by memories, speaking to spirits who no longer hear, and watching over a kingdom of ghosts, his punishment and his legacy. Restoration. In the year 1281 DR, for the first time in many years, someone set foot in the ruins of the Severed Hand. These adventurers, coming from East Haven, sought guidance from Larrel, hoping to uncover the lost history of the citadel. Little did they know, their journey would do far more than just reveal the past. It would bring peace to a tortured soul. The adventurers ventured deep into the desolate ruins, aiding Larrel in ways he hadn't experienced in ages. Their efforts restored parts of the citadel, breathing life into the decaying stone and bringing light where darkness had long reigned. They freed the ghosts trapped within the citadel, allowing them to move on to the afterlife, at last finding rest after centuries of haunting the ruins. But it wasn't just the spirits that would find peace. These brave souls also brought something that Larrel had long since given up hope of ever seeing: the memories of his beloved daughter, Yvain. In their search, they uncovered journals hidden deep within the Hand, some in the lower depths of Dorn's Deep. These journals detailed Yvain's efforts to reunify the elves and dwarves, her role in the failed defense of Dorn's Deep, and the tragic events of her final days. Through these writings, Larrel learned of the sacrifices his daughter made and the tragic end that befell her, which he had never fully understood. For the first time in centuries, Larrel found solace. His heart, once heavy with grief and anger, was lifted. The truth about Yvain's fate and the realization that she had fought valiantly allowed him to find the peace he had long sought. As the adventurers moved on to complete their quest, Larrel made a decision. He chose to remain in the Severed Hand, not out of punishment, but out of duty. He would ensure that the last of the elven souls trapped there would find their way to the afterlife, as his daughter had. For the first time in an eternity, Larrel felt the peace of knowing his purpose. He had failed his people, but he would not fail them again. And so he stayed, a guardian of the past, ensuring that the elven spirits would finally be free. Unexpected truth. After leaving the ancient walls of the elven citadel in search of the evil threatening Kuldahar and the Dale, the conclusion of this story came in a most unexpected place. Deep beneath the lower Dorn's Deep, within a gnome refugee camp, the adventurers encountered a drow merchant named Nim. During their conversation, Nim, with an air of arrogance, openly admitted to a dark and treacherous deed. With a sense of pride, he confessed that he was the one responsible for stealing the powerful artifacts forged by the alliance between the elves of the Severed Hand and the dwarves of Dorn's Deep. He shamelessly revealed that he had sold these artifacts to the armies of goblins and orcs. The drow's words were cold and indifferent, as if recounting a mere business transaction. He spoke of the cursed elves and the ruined dwarven citadels as though they were nothing more than casualties of a greater scheme. Two ancient cultures, wiped out because of his actions. Nim had done this for several reasons. First, the goblins had paid him a fortune for the artifacts, a sum too tempting to ignore. Second, the dwarves had threatened to attack drow outposts, a dangerous move that would have forced the drow to defend themselves. But the most significant reason was that the elves of the Severed Hand had essentially signed their own death warrant. By accusing the dwarves and breaking the alliance, they had sealed their fate. The drow, ever the opportunists, simply capitalized on the chaos, selling the artifacts to those who would bring about the downfall of both elven and dwarven civilizations. The once proud alliance of elves and dwarves had crumbled, not because of the orcs or goblins, but because of the actions of one self-serving individual who had manipulated the very forces that led to the downfall of two great cultures. This revelation marked a turning point in the tragic tale of the Severed Hand, the elves and the dwarves. What remained were only the lingering ghosts of the past and the harsh truth that sometimes the greatest evils arise not from armies or wars but from greed and betrayal. Legend of the Chimera. After years of silence, the ruins of the Severed Hand once again became a focal point of dark ambition. The fortress, long abandoned and forgotten by most, was soon to witness a new chapter, one that would bring even more destruction and conflict. Around 1306 DR, the Cambions Aesir and Madai, twisted children of demons, arrived at the forsaken citadel. Their vision was as grand as it was dark, to transform the crumbling fortress into a stronghold for their legion of the Chimera and a sacred temple devoted to Iachtuhvim, the god of tyranny. Aesir and Madai, with their infernal power, quickly enslaved hundreds of men and women, forcing them to labor on a massive restoration project. The fortress was rebuilt in their image, twisted, imposing, and drenched in dark magic. Seeking to establish an uneasy peace with the nearby 10 towns, the twins sent emissaries to negotiate a trade agreement. However, things took a turn when the mayor of Bryn Shander, in an effort to avoid conflict, sent a representative with pastries laced with holy water, an offering of peace. But the twins, being half demon, were burned by the holy water. The gesture, meant to diffuse tension, instead ignited a fierce and bitter war between the twins and the 10 towns, plunging the region back into chaos. As the conflict deepened, a band of adventurers from Luskan, intent on aiding Targos, made their way to the fortress. There they found a massive population of enslaved people, and in an act of liberation, they fought their way through the fortress, defeating the Glabrezu guards that protected it. During their venture through Severed Hand, they encountered mage named Auric the Grey, who had been hiding in the Tower of Labalas, a place of great magical significance. He warned the adventurers that the fortress, altered by the chaotic magic of the twins, was on the brink of collapse, being slowly dragged into limbo by the unnatural forces at work. As the adventurers confronted Aesir and Madai, the twins began to be drawn into limbo themselves. The ground shook as the hand itself shifted violently, collapsing into the void. In the end, the fortress was consumed by the dimensional rift, the majority of the structure vanishing into limbo. Only the Tower of Labelas remained, floating high above the ruins, untouched by the catastrophe below. And though the hand may have fallen, its legacy remains, woven into the fabric of Icewind Dale's history. A cautionary tale of the cost of pride, the dangers of unchecked ambition, and the strength of those who fight, even when the odds seem impossible. But as with all stories, the final chapter is never truly written until those who come after choose to turn the page. May the ghosts of the hand rest at last, and may those who still walk the world remember their tale. For it is in remembering the past that we ensure the future is not lost to the same shadows. And that's all for today. Thank you very much for watching, and see you in the next one.